because everybody's waiting for that first block to fall. And so there's a lot of responsibility actually to the first ones who have the license, because if they are successful, they will pave the ground. That is really horrible. And that is something that is holding us back actually from really making the next step.
Hello everyone. Today we're in the sunny Malta in our headquarters for our OKX Europe. And here with me I have two very smart gentlemen, OGs in crypto, Quinten, Francois and Alexander Höptner. And we're going to discuss today the MiCAR regulation and the crypto landscape. So pleasure to meet you, gentlemen. Maybe you can tell us about yourself and your experience a little bit. Who wants to start?
Should I start?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I'm in the space right now for 8 years, full time, especially as a what they call KOL. I started with YouTube, and I had I think I had the luck to start very early. I was one of the first crypto YouTubers, and then in 2021 I switched to X. And in the meantime, actually before that, I wrote the best-selling book in Dutch on crypto that there is. So I'm very proud about that. And I also co-founded WeRate, which is a Web3 startup. So actually, because of the book, I also worked with the regulators, especially the ones in Belgium. But I also talk with some people about the MiCAR regulations. Yeah.
Very good, very exciting.
Yeah, I came from the classical exchange industry. I worked for Deutsche Börse for a long time. And actually at 2013, I jumped into the crypto space when I had my fill with the classical financial industry. And I wanted to set up the first regulated market for trading of in-game items of computer games on blockchain basis. So that was my start, but you can imagine that was a little bit too early, 2013. And so that failed. And then I became CEO of Börse Stuttgart, the first, I think, official public exchange to embrace crypto and launch in Germany the crypto trading at Bison and the first regulated MTF. And then I jumped onto BitMEX, been CEO for a while there. And now we are embracing MiCAR with a regulated stablecoin in Germany. So we applied for an e-money license to list an e-money token in Germany. And put our parts that we can trade under MiCAR, all the fantastic products that we'll probably explore.
It's very exciting. We actually have today two very different experiences, so that will help us, I guess, to even understand better two different standpoints of maybe institutional investors and retail, which is both of them are very highly, I guess, impacted by the MiCAR regulation. So my first question will be actually about the competitive landscape. So how do you think that MiCAR impacts the competitive landscape in European Union or EEA compared to other regulations, other regulatory regimes? Whoever.
I think that you have for the first time a very strong regulatory framework that spans over a vast, let's say, region, and it gives regulatory clarity. Now everybody has to jump onto that one, so and that one is in that respect, it's sort of a level playing field for everybody. So even established institutions who want to dabble into these products need to apply for a MiCAR top-up license or anything around that. So in that sense, it is new to everybody, but everybody has to embrace it. And a lot of regulators, what we experience globally, are really closely watching what's happening here. And you can also assume that a lot of international regulators, especially when it comes to South Korea and Japan, because they're very closely linked to, for example, what BaFin is doing, that there will be possibilities to actually cross over or cross the bridge to other regulatory regimes. And so you will see a lot of players jumping into this field. They are all jumping from different angles, be it now institutional, be it retail, so that's a different animal. But we see a lot of also outbound interest to actually relocate companies here, apply for a MiCAR license, and then exploit the possibilities of the asset tokenization.
And I also think, in the European Union, all the countries can implement it a little bit however they want. I think some countries will be easier still to operate, and some will be more difficult. I think Malta is really pushing it forward, for example. But I think MiCAR solves some kind of problem, but it's also about the implementation of how it's going to happen. So I think within Europe, there's still going to be a very different landscape of crypto companies. There will be a lot, for example, here in Malta. And I also think like around the world, indeed, like everyone is gonna look at MiCAR, how that's gonna play out. But yeah, it's of course a very hands-on approach. If you compare it to, for example, how the US is doing it, a very hands-off approach. Let's see what the best way eventually will be. But yeah, it's interesting to see where it's going from here.
But you touched on a very interesting point, because MiCAR, in a sense, it's a European law, but the fundamental laws are national laws. For example, for e-money institutes, it's national law. MiCAR is European law. And so there are still differences between the national law and the European law, which you just tapped into. So although theoretically you can passport everywhere within the European Union, de facto, it's not always the case, because there are minor differences, be it on data protection, be it on retail customer care. So even if you're in Malta, even if you're in Germany, or if you're in France or wherever in the European Union, you still have to double check whether you have to add something to your, let's say, local license, because otherwise you cannot tap into these markets, although you're in the European Union. So you will see that there will be still, over the next coming years, adoption work to be done between the national laws and the European law, so that you really have a fungible European market.
No, that's very interesting. So does it mean, for example, that the German companies will be more willing to go, the institutional investors and institutional traders will be more willing to go to BaFin, let's say, based companies or exchanges? Or does it mean that exchanges should just diversify and make sure that, they're passported correctly in different countries?
I mean, this is I think, a very difficult topic. I'd call it regulatory arbitrage game. Yeah. I think the European Union does its best to actually prevent that. But yes, there is still a view, especially from regulated institutional players, about, let's say, the quality of the setup and the thoroughness of the setup. And it ultimately depends on your customer group. Yeah. Some customers require maybe higher standards in certain aspects, and others. MiCAR makes a level playing field for everybody. So it is a base standard. But yes, let's say some regulators, especially international, put more attention on a company if you're licensed in a tier 1 jurisdiction than if you're licensed in a tier 2 or tier 3 jurisdiction. That's still the case.
Quinten, you touched upon a very, very interesting point. You mentioned the challenges, that MiCAR licensing brings to retail, and you mentioned KOLs and YouTubers and influencers. Maybe you can elaborate on this, because that's very interesting.
Yeah, so also there are a few regulations in the framework of MiCAR, but I think that is very locally different. Like everywhere it's very, very different. I think even more than for the company side of things. So yeah, if you, for example, look at Belgium, the regulation is super, super strict for people who want to give like financial education. But also, if you look at the companies, then you also see that in some countries it's still the case that crypto companies can still not get like a bank account. So in some places it's still that bad in the European Union. So I mean, what I personally think it will lead to is it's gonna be like very geopolitically very interesting, but it could turn out very bad as well for the European Union if they. Of course, there is the local regulations, the local rules, but if that somehow is not gonna be overruled by the European Union, then I think we have a problem in the European Union, to be very fair in general. Because I compare it to if you're driving in a street and you just need to go to the end of the street, and the difference is, for example, in some parts of the world, there's 5 traffic lights, and in the European Union there is 15. Like there's a lot of regulation implemented right now, and the companies need to like try to navigate through all that. And that is, of course, the framework in general, and there's more and more coming on a local level. So it's going to be very interesting, and I think there's an interesting comparison with the dot-com bubble with technology companies, where the European Union did something very similar. We saw the US doing a hands-off approach, which they're doing right now as well. So I just hope it's not going to turn out in the same way. But let's stay positive. It's good that we have regulations. I'm pro-regulation. It's important for the next billion people to get them into the crypto space, into blockchain. So I'm very positive, but I'm still careful because history wasn't always very kind to this amount of regulations and this approach.
But again, you have touched, especially at the beginning, on a very important point, because when we talk about mass market adoption, we talk about how to convince here and how to convince there, but we have much more fundamental problems. They are very, very down-to-earth problems. Getting a bank account is nothing to do with major mass adoption. But even us, we apply for an e-money institution license. We don't touch crypto at all, and it took us months to get a bank account. So the fundamental basics that you actually need to run a company, that's the biggest difficulty. MiCAR is not the biggest difficulty. Yes, you have to run through certain countries and you have to apply for the, let's say, specialties, or you have to bake them in. But that's all doable. The good thing about the regulation in Europe is you can just download it. I mean, download it, read it. It's hard work. It's not magic. You just have to do it. But I mean, getting the fundamentals out of the door is like working in Belgium, getting a bank account, getting the company up and running. That is really horrible in the European Union. And that is something that is holding us back actually from really making the next step.
But I think the bank account problems, it's not specifically European Union problems. I think it's just the image of crypto that sometimes comes as, maybe bad or not secure. So I think MiCAR is one of the ways to promote the security and safety and properly taking care of the especially retail investors, because I think this is what's important. So can it be, is it a good thing for retail, essentially, MiCAR regulation? So can you be safe and secure if you trade on the exchange that is MiCAR regulated?
I think it will bring some extra security for retail, definitely. I think, of course, the most will change for companies. There will not so much will change for retail. So, but yeah, I think they can trust exchanges like OKX and other big players who will be MiCAR regulated, or will have the license. You can trust them more. But I think in practice, not much is going to change.
Because I think, the drive of the crypto market, of the volume, is always associated with institutions, right? With the large institutions that bring in billions of AUM, and it essentially drives the volumes and essentially drives the growth of the market. So I guess this type of regulation, is it beneficial for institutions? Do you think there are more private banks, wealth funds, macro funds, hedge funds, all kind of financial institutions? Do you think they're going to come to this space in European Union?
Absolutely. I fully agree that for retail, I want to even take a little bit of a controversial side on that one. I think largely they don't care, as long as we are somewhat regulated. But for institutionals, it's absolutely vital, especially when they are more in a regulated space themselves. They can't do it. We had a lot of conversations 2017, 18, 19 with nearly all in Germany DAX companies, a lot of European companies in my Hong Kong time with a lot of large funds, wealth funds. And they were all interested in tokenization, but the legal framework was not there already. So the definition of ownership, digital ownership, was not there. And so they needed the legal framework to really get into it. They had all POCs and projects and probes, but they never resulted in anything because the framework was not there. Now the framework is there. Now stability is there. Now we see a lot of companies reviving these projects. They still need certain aspects like a regulated stablecoin, like more banking services for tokenized players. There's some pieces still missing. But without MiCAR as a last step of the regulation of MiFID and all the regulation steps before that, they will not be able to tap into that at all. So for me, MiCAR, in that sense, we might complain about certain aspects, but it is the groundbreaking change that allows now to tokenize everything.
So do you think that companies that used to trade on CME now will be able to trade on the MiCAR licensed exchanges? So you tapped a little bit into the fact that they can't hold crypto, for example, they can't hold the underlying. So do you think that that might change with the MiCAR regulation?
I think yes, but we will have some very menial basic things before that is like big institutions have difficulties in onboarding new partners because of their API costs and API maintenance. Adding a new partner means adding costs. They have to plan that in. It's a budgeting problem. So you will have problems that are really not problems of the industry or of the regulation. It's the normal problems that you have in companies that you have to solve. But yes, 100%, because we don't have a global fungible market. We have regional markets that are connected via monopolies, post-trade monopolies. And with tokenization, you can circumvent these monopolies, but you needed the regulatory framework and stability. And that's here now, so you can do it. And then you can cut more or less half of the cost of a trade, especially when it comes to cross-border trade. So let's do it.
Makes sense. No, that's very good. So innovation and regulation, what do you think? Is it gonna suffocate their innovation essentially? I mean, again, something that Quinten was talking about, the street with 15 traffic lights. Do you think that we somehow can avoid that and actually balance well on between innovation and regulation?
I hope we can. But I think the results of that we will see that in the next few years, of course, how that will turn out. But of course, I hope it will push innovation. I hope it will, of course, the basis of everything is trust in our industry. So if we can build trust, if we have this regulation right now in place, it really creates the opportunity for people to really start innovating, because before that, there were so many regulatory difficulties and gray zones, and nobody knew what to do and so on, especially many years ago. But yeah, it should drive innovation. But again, if I look to the different parts of the world, of course we're focusing on MiCAR right now. But I'm not sure if this is gonna drive away the innovation out of the European Union, or is gonna attract the innovation into the European Union. Let's see about that. I'm actually a bit more on the side that I'm afraid that it will drive out innovation because of, again, like all the traffic lights. You prefer like a street with 5 traffic lights instead of 15, right? But yeah, let's see. I mean, it could also potentially turn out that it's going to attract innovation, depending also on what other parts in the world, what will happen there regulatory-wise.
I think Germany might actually prefer 15 traffic lights rather than 5 traffic lights.
And it's ridiculous, who would have expected that Germany is playing, let's say, in some aspects, a leading role in that. Normally, we are like, when everything is already done, then we put our tracks and then we roll it over. But it's quite funny to see. But one aspect which I really like is what you said is the danger for the European Union is really the lack of funding money, VC money, because essentially regulation is just a direct, let's say, it's just more money. You need more money because you need more people, you need more processes, the license application costs money, the equity underlying costs money. So ultimately, setting up a startup is not restricted by the regulation, it just costs more money. And here comes the problem of the European Union, because we are not as, let's say, freely giving, quote unquote, like you have it in Asia, like you have it in the US. And to convince European investors that actually the value of the regulation and the possibilities of the European Union comes along with them having to put more money on the table. And whether they understand this is for me critical. If they don't understand it, I'm fully with you. Then we will see a first wave, and afterwards it will be corporate innovation, and we know how successful that is. So we need to have better funding routes.
So how do we convince them? How do we convince that it's better to trade on the MiCAR regulated exchange rather than on CME, let's say what they're doing, or buy ETF and hold? How do we convince them?
Like always, success. I mean, come on. If you run an exchange and it is successful, and you're the first one doing that and groundbreaking, and you do these corporations, and let's say there's no bigger fallout, then they will all jump onto that, because everybody's waiting for that first block to fall, and so there's a lot of responsibility actually to the first ones who have the license, because if they are successful, they will pave the ground. If they ruin it, they will scrap the market. And so it all depends on the first movers.
Well, that's quite the momentum we are currently having then. We were talking about a lot about MiCAR regulation and how it might be difficult, how it might be challenging on the contrary, how it might actually succeed. What about other countries? Do you have any view? I mean, we touched upon US a little bit. Quinten was talking about their hands-off approach, but VARA, Dubai seems like a strong regulator. Do you have any opinion about how can MiCAR actually fit into the existing landscape?
I think it will have a huge impact, and everybody's closely monitoring what's happening here. How's the adoption to the new MiCAR rules, and how they then prepare. You see in a stablecoin space, at least, you see Hong Kong moving, Singapore moving, Japan is moving, South Korea is moving. You have traditional ties between Japan, South Korea, and Germany. So if the German regulator goes a certain way, high likelihood that South Korea and Japan are at least not far away. Same for Switzerland and Singapore. So these regulators, they all talk to each other because ultimately they build a global market and they want to see that it also fits together. So they're closely monitoring that. And then it comes back to which customer groups are you actually talking to and tapping into? Yeah, is it more retail focused? Then other areas are more interesting for you, like Middle East. Yeah, for retail investors, Middle East might be a perfect, let's say, regulatory framework. If you go more on really classical financial institutions, I have my doubts. Yeah, so it really depends on which customer groups you're tapping into and which corporates you want to attract.
Well, regarding Middle East, I can just tap in a little bit. So we see a lot of actually funds and large hedge funds and macro funds and digital hedge funds who are moving to Abu Dhabi, to Dubai, setting up their entities there and trading out of these countries for many, many reasons, including the tax reasons, I believe. However, I think that's a very attractive and very friendly regulator. So it's not necessarily for retail, but we see a lot of activity there in this region. So
correct, but these are also players who trade in Cayman Islands, BVI, Bermuda, Bahamas, and the likes. And depending on the customer groups, if you would say you build a global, so in the automotive industry, so when you look into the automotive industry and you want to have mobility, for example, tokenized by all car producers, I heavily doubt that they pick and choose one, which is not tier 1 jurisdiction, irrespective of the tax situation that you have there or whether it's a friendly regulator or not. Because if something happens, then directly there will be, hey, this is why you put this or you chose that deliberate location. So it really depends on which customer groups are serving.
Yeah, and I do agree, but also like in the Middle East, in Dubai, the UAE, you see that it's actually not really good for retail, because basically with Dubai, people think about in Dubai you could do whatever you want. That's actually true because they don't enforce it too much. But if, for example, as a retail investor in crypto, you cannot even withdraw money from an exchange to your bank account in the UAE. It's not possible. They're gonna close your bank account. So it's like there's also still uncertainty there. There's also still some stuff that needs to happen. I mean, like for example, here in the European Union, you can withdraw money to your bank account.
No, but I can tell that. So OKX is licensed in the UAE, and I'm a retail client of OKX. I can absolutely withdraw my money and deposit to OKX. I guess it actually depends on the regulatory status of the exchange that you're working with. So if you're working with the exchange that is not regulated by VARA, so it might be difficult. But I think that depends on the regulation. Yeah.
Yeah, fair point. I think it's changing with the VARA license as well. But I mean, even here in the European Union, like 10 years ago, something totally unregulated, you could still withdraw your money already to your bank account. So I think they're more careful there for the retail side of things, but of course they have a very attractive climate, regulatory, and I mean weather as well. Literally a good climate there for businesses to set up there, and they're very welcoming. And they have, of course, these free zones that are specialized in certain areas, such as like crypto. All the crypto companies in the UAE are together in one area.
Nice. What about other regulators?
Sorry?
What about other regulators like Switzerland, FINMA, famous FINMA?
I think, for example, the UK saw a huge opportunity with the MiCAR regulations when they were first announced. They were looking for the little places in the regulation that were not really covered or that they could attract or they thought were gonna be like over-regulated, and they jumped into that market. So the UK, of course, historically seen a very important financial country, right? So they don't want to lose that status, and they're gonna do everything to attract as many crypto companies and Web3 companies in general as possible. I think same for Switzerland. I think they are best positioned to look at the weaknesses of the regulation in the European Union and then jump into that. And the US historically seen a very interesting country for entrepreneurship, for funding. Like on every corner of the street, there is like a VC there. So they have always been very attractive for innovation, for companies, for entrepreneurship. So let's see how they're gonna work it out there. But again, it's a hands-off approach. So that combined with the entrepreneurship, it makes it very attractive. Of course, with the current administration in the US, it's uncertain how they're gonna develop this because they're more and more focused on the US, of course. So let's see, but it looks like it's gonna be like very interesting to see what's gonna happen in the US. Yeah.
But I think, at least in our experience, nobody talks about London or the UK. UK is out of European zone. Nobody cares. Sorry to say, nobody cares, because European Union there was an act. I think it was around Apple. When not the location of the company is relevant for the regulation, but the location of your trader or your buyer. If the buyer sits in the European Union, you have to run with European laws, irrespective of where you sit. So you can be exploiting some difficulties in the European Union under MiCAR. Ultimately, quote unquote, you're illegal if you don't cope with exactly how the European Union is setting it up. And therefore, I think it will be extremely difficult from the outside to try to squeeze in, if you're not fully running up with the laws. And on Switzerland, interestingly, Switzerland was the first really to come out with how tokenization and how to regulate tokenization. But you know what? Which major players in Switzerland? Nobody. Nobody's in Switzerland. Sorry to say, and nobody's in Switzerland.
We have some large asset managers that are holding
asset managers like crypto originals. Nobody's there.
Ethereum headquarters are still there, I guess, no?
They are there. Yes, they have
as well.
Their headquarters. They're there. But let's say, but
it's on paper as well. I mean, there's not a physical office even. I went there and I tried to visit them and I didn't find them.
That's the point.
So.
And there's no OKX or no gate. Nobody's there. And for a long time, that was also true for Singapore, that they announced very early on to regulate. But when was the first license granted? Years afterwards. So walk the talk is a little bit difficult there. So we have to see how that really plays out. We have to see how normally when UK would have still be part of European Union, we would all be sitting in London. Everybody would be sitting in London. But right now, nobody cares. Sorry.
It's true. Like I think they tried in the beginning when the first few versions of the MiCAR framework were presented in the European Union, European Parliament. Sorry, you saw the UK really trying to geopolitically play with this and say like, okay, but then come to us. If it's gonna be like too harsh of a regulation, come to us. But it's indeed not working. Nobody's going to the UK. But yeah, I mean, Switzerland, I'm still very interested in seeing what they want, what they're gonna push forward, because of course there are some legal entities there. But I agree, for the rest, it's not much. They were actually the first ones for tokenization. They were the first one to launch an exchange-traded product, even in Europe. So it's a country that really wants to push forward as well. But how they're gonna fit in or see some opportunity outside of the MiCAR license or some things that are not covered, that's let's see how they're gonna do that. It's gonna be interesting though.
Yeah,
they have to.
We also have Australia. Do you have any thoughts on Australia? I think that's highly retail market, like a large retail market, and also regulated. So
I remember that they were also very early on. Also, the Australian Stock Exchange was very early on, but then again, not really something happened outside of the local market. And so it's like same with Canada. It's very closed market. New Zealand, very closed market. So you have individual markets that are actually developing quite, let's say, quote unquote, nicely. Yeah. But very isolated. Yeah. And probably with good offerings. But that means if you as a company want to tap into that market, you have to be local present. So it's very cumbersome to get there, even if the regulation is not that cumbersome. It's like in South Korea, it's like in Japan, it's like in Brazil. Maybe not as hard as that, but you have to be local on the ground. And then very often you can only, with a license that you get, you can only address the local market. It doesn't help you outside of the market. And then essentially, if you go to New Zealand, it's a small market. Canada is a small market. So you have to see how these regulators actually open up to the broader groups like MiCAR, because then you open up your borders and you open up the potential investor base.
It's actually a very good point that a lot of people, I think, forget. VARA, it's UE only, right? Australia, it's a local market. Canada, but EA, it's a number of countries, and that's very exciting. That's people forget that Germany, its own market, Belgium, its own market, France, and other countries. So it's very, very exciting. I guess thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure. It was very, very interesting, and I hope our listeners enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.